Picture the modern tech billionaire, right? You know the image. They're on this softly lit stage.
Oh, yeah, wearing the perfectly tailored minimalist outfit.
Exactly. Pacing back and forth in front of a giant screen with a graph that just, shoots up and to the right.
Right.
And they are promising you that the combination of artificial intelligence and, near limitless clean energy is about to deliver this global age of abundance.
They look straight into the camera and basically tell you that scarcity is a solved problem.
Right. The fundamental friction of human existence is just over. But I want you to contrast that sterile, optimistic stage with a totally different image.
Let's hear it.
Picture a native chief in the Pacific Northwest, like 500 years ago. He's standing before his entire community and a group of fierce rivals.
Okay.
He is also dealing with an age of abundance. But his solution to having more than enough isn't to optimize it.
Right.
He is systematically burning his own immense wealth. Destroying perfectly good canoes, throwing precious copper shields into the sea, burning vats of oil.
Just to prove he has the power to lose it.
Exactly. We are constantly told today that abundance will simply solve all human problems. But history stubbornly suggests that abundance doesn't eliminate our problems. It just invents entirely new, fascinating ones.
Yeah, because when you strip away the silicon chips in the server farms, abundance is an entirely material reality. And humanity has navigated it repeatedly.
We've been here before.
We really have. We have solved survival locally across the globe over and over again. And the historical record of what human beings actually build when their basic needs are met provides this brilliant and, sometimes terrifying blueprint for our own immediate future.
And that is the core mission of our deep dive into the sources today. We are pulling from historical dossiers, the latest archaeological genomic data, and the frameworks laid out in the 2025 book, Abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson.
It's a great book.
It really is. And we want to extract actionable lessons from ancient societies that successfully converted massive energy surpluses into cultural capital.
Right, to test the uncomfortable truths about who actually gets to enjoy the fruits of a surplus.
Exactly. And ultimately, we are going to build a framework for how you and the policymakers shaping your city might manage the impending AI-driven abundance.
So we need to start with the physical reality.
Yes, we have to define abundance not as some utopian feeling, but as a rigid, measurable equation.
Because abundance is, at its core, discretionary time. And that time is purchased through a material surplus.
Which means what, exactly, in historical terms?
It is the margin of calories, of raw materials, and of stored energy that a community holds in excess of what it requires to survive the current season.
Okay, so just having more than you strictly need.
Right. The math is incredibly mundane, but the downstream effects are explosive. When humans aren't spending every waking hour securing their next meal, they instinctively take that freed time and convert it into culture.
But we should dispel any romantic fairy tales right away.
Oh, absolutely, because the exact same caloric surplus that gives a master artisan the time to build a cathedral or carve a statue.
It also buys the swords for the empire.
Exactly. And it builds the slave market.
Yeah.
Surplus is morally neutral.
So, we really need to ground this in the mechanics of how a full belly actually creates a monument. We are talking about the division of labor.
Yes, in a purely subsistence society where every adult has to forage or hunt from dawn to dusk just to get enough calories to wake up the next day, nobody gets to be a specialist.
Right. If you decide to spend 40 hours a week trying to perfect the art of carving a stone mask, you simply starve.
Your community cannot afford to carry your dead weight.
The classic architectural model for how humanity escaped that trap was popularized in the 20th century by the archaeologist V. Gordon Childe.
Right, he coined the term the Neolithic Revolution.
Yeah, and Childe argued that the invention of agriculture was the ultimate turning point because farming grain allowed for massive storable surpluses.
That granary of wheat creates a caloric slack.
Caloric slack, I love that term.
It's so useful because suddenly the village can afford to feed a percentage of its population who do not farm at all.
So you get full-time potters.
Potters, metallurgists, scribes, priests, soldiers.
Yeah.
In Childe's model, the city walls and the complex writing systems are literally downstream of the plow.
The monuments are just downstream of the granary.
Culture because the physical manifestation of what a society chooses to spend its surplus on.
But, the textbook neatness of this plow equals pyramid theory is satisfying, but the sources push back against agriculture being the sole VIP path to civilization.
Oh, heavily.
Yeah. There is a deeply persistent counter-narrative suggesting that long before farming, hunter-gatherers experienced their own versions of abundance.
Marshall Solons broke this wide open.
Right, in his 1968 essay, The Original Affluent Society.
Yes, he proposed what he called the Zen road to affluence. He argued that there are two ways to be wealthy.
The first being the modern Western way, right? Produce an infinite amount of goods to satisfy infinite desires.
Exactly. And the second, the Zen road, is to simply desire less. Solons looked at ethnographic data, which has since been vigorously debated but remains philosophically vital, suggesting that some foraging groups worked perhaps 15 to 20 hours a week to secure their survival.
Wait, really? Just 15 to 20 hours?
Yeah, they weren't accumulating material wealth because they were nomadic. Carrying things was a burden.
Oh, that makes sense. If you have to carry everything you own, you don't want a lot of stuff.
Right. Their material desires were finite, easily met by their environment. Therefore, the vast majority of their time was leisure. They were affluent in time, not in property.
Think about that in the context of modern hustle culture. Like, we are surrounded by more absolute material wealth than any generation in human history, yet we are all striving desperately for, like, a 4-day work week.
And these nomadic foragers had the 2-day work week figured out thousands of years ago.
It really frames the question of whether an agricultural surplus actually causes civilization, or if it merely permits a specific, heavy, monumental type of civilization.
And we see evidence of this non-agricultural surplus deep in the archaeological record. Consider the site of Shubaika 6 in the Levant.
Oh, yeah, dating back over 14,000 years, the Natufian period.
Exactly. These were hunter-gatherers. But the climate was so rich in wild cereals and game that they could settle down.
Without farming.
Right. And we find them spending enormous amounts of time creating specialized bone beads and ornaments.
Or look at Poverty Point in modern-day Louisiana, right around 1700 BCE.
A great example. A society living entirely on wild fish, waterfowl, and gathered plants.
And they organized massive coordinated labor to build these monumental concentric earthworks.
They were not farmers, but they had localized abundance.
Which takes us straight to our first major historical model for managing massive wealth without agriculture. Route 1, abundance you harvest.
We are traveling to the Pacific Northwest coast of North America.
To the complex pre-contact societies of the Tlingit, the Haida, the Kwakwaka'wakw, and the Coast Salish.
Yes. If nature simply hands you a staggering surplus, what do you do with it?
Because the ecology of that Pacific Northwest temperate rainforest offered this unparalleled natural engine for wealth.
The cornerstone was the annual salmon run. Every year, millions of fish would choke the rivers, returning from the ocean to spawn.
It's an incredibly dense, predictable resource.
Crucially, a resource that could be preserved. By smoking and drying the salmon, a family could secure an entire year's worth of high-quality protein and calories in just a matter of weeks.
And when you combine that marine wealth with the endless material resource of ancient red cedar forests, you have the ecological foundation for immense complexity.
They bypassed the plow entirely.
Because securing a year's calories in a few weeks buys you an astonishing amount of discretionary time. It creates a month-long winter leisure season.
And the cultural capital they produced with that time is breathtaking. Anyone who has smelled the deep, earthy scent of a master-carved cedar longhouse
or stood before a towering totem pole.
Right, you understand the weight of this surplus. Those poles aren't mere decorations.
No, they are complex legal documents and genealogies written in wood, requiring hundreds of hours of specialized labor.
They developed chilkat weaving, too.
Yeah.
An agonizingly slow and intricate process using mountain goat wool and cedar bark.
Basically creating ceremonial blankets that are wearable history books.
But the real genius of the Pacific Northwest cultures wasn't just in what they made, but in how they structured their economy to manage the psychological friction of all that wealth.
They engineered an institution known as the potlatch.
Yes, because in a society swimming in storable food and raw materials, status could not simply be won by hoarding.
Right. If everyone has salmon, having more salmon doesn't make you special.
Exactly. The potlatch inverted the modern logic of wealth accumulation. Status was achieved through competitive giving.
It fundamentally breaks the modern capitalist brain. I like to think of it like an anti-monopoly game.
How do you mean?
Well, imagine sitting down to play Monopoly, but the win condition is flipped. The winner isn't the person who bankrupts the other players. The winner is the person who bankrupts themselves the fastest by handing out all their properties to buy their respect of the table.
That is a brilliant analogy. At a potlatch, a high-ranking family or chief would invite rival lineages to a massive feast.
And they would systematically give away mountains of wealth. Hundreds of woven blankets, carved cedar boxes, food, and these incredibly valuable hammered copper shields.
The mechanism of the potlatch converted a physical material surplus into an intangible, permanent social capital.
So when guests accepted these lavish gifts, they were legally and socially validating the host's ancestral privileges, their fishing rights, and their rank.
Yes, the more wealth a chief could afford to distribute, or sometimes dramatically destroy by burning it or throwing it in the ocean, the greater their prestige.
It was a pressure valve for abundance. It ensured that surplus constantly circulated through the community rather than remaining stagnant in a single storehouse.
But it's tempting to look at that and see an egalitarian utopia, right? Where the rivers flow with fish and everyone just shares their wealth while painting masks all winter.
Does it mean surplus naturally creates an egalitarian utopia? The sources do not let us off the hook that easily?
No, they don't. The shadow side of abundance is always present. The potlatch was an engine of redistribution, but it was absolutely not an engine of equality.
So how did the hierarchy actually work?
The staggering caloric surplus of the Pacific Northwest underwrote a rigidly stratified society. You had an entrenched hereditary nobility, commoners, and a deeply institutionalized system of slavery.
Wow.
In some of these coastal populations, up to a quarter of the people were enslaved.
A quarter. That's massive.
Yes, they were often captives taken in brutal warfare with neighboring groups. And that warfare was driven by the desire to accumulate even more wealth and labor to fuel the potlatch cycle.
So the art and the hierarchy were forged in the exact same fire. The time required to carve the magnificent masks was partially paid for by the forced labor of captives.
It is vital to recognize that a surplus does not magically sanitize human nature. It just amplifies our existing social structures.
It turns up the volume on everything. Our capacity for artistic genius and our capacity for violent subjugation.
And we should note the colonial state's reaction to this system. It was so foreign, so threatening to the accumulation-based model of European colonialism that the state felt compelled to dismantle it.
Yeah, the attack on the potlatch is a masterclass in how competing economic ideologies clash. From 1885 until 1951, Canada utilized the Indian Act to officially ban the potlatch.
Colonial administrators and missionaries looked at this complex system of wealth distribution and just deemed it wasteful and reckless.
Because to a state built on the individual hoarding of capital, a society that gained status by giving capital away was an existential obstacle to assimilation.
They imprisoned chiefs, confiscated the sacred masks and coppers, and pushed the economic heart of this abundance culture completely underground.
So the Pacific Northwest model shows us that if nature provides the surplus, humans will build towering monuments and steep, rigid hierarchies. But nature doesn't always deliver the salmon right to your door.
No, it doesn't.
What happens when a society is forced to physically rebuild the earth to squeeze a surplus out of it? We move from Route 1 to Route 2. Abundance, you engineer.
We are traveling to the basin of Mexico, to the height of the Aztec Empire and their capital city of Tenochtitlan.
And we're talking about the Chinampa wetlands.
Yes, the engineering of the Chinampa wetlands is arguably one of the most sophisticated agricultural achievements in human history.
They are often romantically and inaccurately translated as floating gardens.
Right, but they weren't really floating. Chinampas were highly stable, raised agricultural beds constructed directly in the shallow, marshy waters of Lake Texcoco.
Let's break down the physical mechanics of this, because it's basically biological 3D printing, churning out endless calories.
Exactly. The farmers would go out into the lake and stake out massive rectangular plots using ahotu trees. It's a native willow. Willow trees grow incredibly fast, and their roots tangle into a dense underwater cage that acts as a living retaining wall.
Oh, that's incredibly smart.
It is. Inside this wooden perimeter, the farmers would pile up layers of aquatic vegetation, reeds, and incredibly nutrient-rich muck dredged straight from the lake bottom.
Until the surface of the bed rose a few feet above the water level.
Exactly. And the brilliance of the Chinampa lies in its closed-loop nutrient cycle. Because the beds were surrounded by canals, the crops were continuously irrigated from below by capillary action.
So they never had to wait for rain.
Never. Furthermore, the canals acted as a trap for organic waste. Fish detritus, decaying plant matter, and human waste from the city.
And farmers would continuously dredge this fresh, nitrogen-rich mud and spread it on top of the chinampas.
The productivity metrics are staggering. Because the soil was constantly refreshed and watered from below, they didn't need to let the land lie fallow.
A single chinampa could yield up to 7 distinct harvests in a single year on the exact same plot of soil. 7.
We are talking about roughly 10,000 hectares of this hyper-engineered wetland feeding the massive urban center of Tenochtitlan, a city whose population was estimated at 200,000 people.
The chinampa system was so efficient that it could potentially produce 2/3 of the city's required food.
So, applying Gordon Child's math here reveals the scale of their cultural capital. If a fraction of the population can feed 200,000 people using mud and willows, you suddenly have a massive urban class freed from food production.
The Chinampas literally built the Templo Mayor, the towering twin pyramid complex at the center of the city.
They afforded the specialists the time to carve the 24-ton sunstone and the intricate Olzaki monolith.
This caloric slack funded the astronomers calculating precise planetary movements and the scribes painting vast codices.
The Chinampa model is so resilient that modern agronomists continue to study the surviving remnants today.
Right, like at Xochimilco.
Yes, as a model for sustainable, high-yield urban agriculture. But once again, we encounter the dark reflection of abundance.
Because if they essentially engineered a post-scarcity food network, why do they need such a militarized, brutal empire?
Because surplus is morally neutral. The same density of caloric wealth that finances the carving of the sunstone also finances the logistical nightmare of a standing army.
In the basin Mexico, the sheer volume of discretionary time was captured by a centralized elite who directed it toward imperial expansion.
They utilized their specialist classes to manufacture weapons, manage complex logistical supply chains, and enforce a state religion that famously required large-scale human sacrifice.
Abundance can finance conquest and coercion just as easily as it finances astronomy.
The centralization of an engineered surplus inevitably concentrates power, and concentrated power seeks to expand itself.
Which brings up a fascinating transition. We've seen surplus expressed in perishable cedar wood in the Pacific Northwest and engineered into soil and wetland crops in Mexico.
But food spoils.
Raise.
Wood rots.
Right. If a society wants a surplus to buy permanent intergenerational status, they need to convert their spare time into something indestructible.
They need to convert it into gold.
And we need to look at cultures that turn their excess time into the ultimate universal symbol of wealth and explore how a society actually keeps it.
We travel now to the Andes and the highlands of Colombia to examine the phenomenon of the vanished surplus versus the living surplus.
The historical dossier offers 2 profound case studies here. First, the vanished. The San Agustín culture, which thrived between roughly 50 CE and 400 CE.
The fertile volcanic soils of the region provided a reliable agricultural base.
Yeah.
And they channeled that caloric slack into an elite class of master stoneworkers.
Leaving behind over 500 massive, megalithic, anthropomorphic statues guarding elaborate burial mounds.
But the truly staggering conversion of time into wealth happened slightly later, with the Muisca culture of the Bogota highlands.
They were the undisputed masters of gold.
Yes. The Muisca utilized an incredibly sophisticated metallurgical technique called lost wax casting. But they didn't just work with pure gold. They worked with an alloy called tumbaga.
A mixture of gold and copper, right?
Exactly.
Let's actually explain the mechanism of what they did next, because it's ingenious. It's a process called depletion gilding.
Right.
They would take an object cast in this gold-copper alloy and basically bathe it in highly corrosive acidic plant extracts. The acid chemically eats away the copper right at the surface level, leaving behind a microscopic, spongy layer of pure 24-karat gold.
They would then heat and burnish the object until that spongy gold compacted into a brilliant, flawless, gleaming surface.
They were chemically manipulating metals to extract the sun's color. It's amazing.
And the pinnacle of their metallurgical artistry is perfectly captured in the famous Muisca raft. Discovered in a cave in 1969, this small, exquisitely detailed artifact was cast sometime between 1295 and 1410 CE.
And it serves as a literal snapshot of the El Dorado ceremony at Lake Guatavita.
El Dorado. The gilded one.
We've all grown up with the myth of the lost city of gold, but the reality is much more fascinating. It started as a person and a ritual.
A new Muisca ruler, upon taking power, would be stripped naked and coated in a sticky resin. He was then dusted entirely in pure gold dust until he became a living statue of light.
Wow.
Accompanied by priests, he would be floated out on a raft to the exact center of Lake Guatavita, a crater lake. At the climax of the ceremony, they would physically throw massive amounts of meticulously crafted gold artifacts and raw emeralds into the dark water.
As a religious offering to the gods, I want you, the listener, to really sit with that image. Thousands of hours of highly specialized labor, mining the gold, smelting the copper, perfecting the depletion gilding process with plant acids.
Creating these intricate, spiritually significant pieces of art.
And they didn't use it for commerce. They didn't use it to buy grain. They converted their surplus into pure sacred storytelling, and then they threw it in a lake.
It is the absolute ultimate flex of discretionary time. It was their specific cultural mechanism for managing their wealth.
But the tragedy of the Muisca is that their method of handling abundance became a beacon for their own destruction.
The story of the Gilded Man mutated in the fevered imaginations of European conquistadors into a myth of an entire city constructed of endless gold.
Extractive greed. The Spanish arrived, and they didn't see a sacred cosmology. They saw a bank vault. They literally attempted to cut a notch in the rim of the crater lake to drain Guadavita and scoop the offerings off the bottom.
So for the Muisca, their surplus was basically a giant neon sign inviting imperial plunder.
Which presents a deeply vital question for our modern framework. If advertising your abundance simply invites a more powerful entity to come and extract it, how do any indigenous markers of surplus survive?
For the answer, we pivot from the vanished surplus to the living surplus. We turn to the Guna people of San Blas, Panama.
This isn't ancient history locked in a museum display. This is a living, breathing model of abundance happening today.
The Guna benefit from a profound ecological surplus derived from a mixed economy. They harvest the rich marine life of the coral reefs, cultivate coconuts, and maintain productive mainland forest agriculture.
And this highly stable, caloric base affords Guna women the immense discretionary time required to create extraordinary forms of cultural capital.
The most famous expression of this time is the mola.
For those who haven't seen one, a mola is a masterpiece of textile engineering. They utilize a technique called reverse applique.
A Guna woman will stack anywhere from 2 to 7 layers of differently colored cotton cloth.
Then she meticulously cuts intricate patterns, geometric labyrinths, local animals, cosmic symbols, down through the specific layers to reveal the colors beneath.
Folding the raw edges back under and sewing them down with tiny, nearly invisible hand stitches.
A single high-quality mola can take hundreds of hours of focused, specialized labor. It is surplus visually expressed in thread.
Alongside the molas, Guna women also proudly wear gold. They wear prominent gold nose rings called olasu and large gold pectoral plates as everyday markers of their identity and their wealth.
So, how are the Gunas still wearing their gold today? If the Muisca were destroyed for their gold, how did the Gunas survive the 20th century while openly wearing theirs? How did they protect their molas and their olasu from a modern state?
The mechanism of survival is purely political defense. In 1919, the Panamanian government implemented aggressive assimilation policies that essentially amounted to ethnocide.
They sought to force the Guna into the mainstream Hispanic culture.
And their primary tactic was to attack the physical manifestations of the Guna's cultural capital. The police actively tried to ban women from wearing the mola and the gold olasu.
Just like the Canadian colonial state attacking the potlatch in the Pacific Northwest, the state always targets the unique way a culture chooses to spend its surplus, because controlling the surplus means controlling the identity.
Precisely. But the Guna recognized that abundance does not protect itself. In 1925, they organized and launched the Guna Revolution.
They literally fought back.
They physically drove the Panamanian police forces out of their territory. Following the uprising, they successfully negotiated an autonomous territory. They fought a literal war for the right to wear their art and control their own surplus.
The actionable lesson here is incredibly sharp. Abundance as identity is never safe. If a community generates a surplus, that benefit will be extracted by a centralized power unless the community actively organizes political structures to defend it.
You have to fight for the right to own your time.
But speaking of societies that supposedly failed to manage their abundance, let's look at the ultimate morality tale of a civilization that allegedly ate itself to death.
Right, and why the newest science says we have the story completely backward.
We are talking about Easter Island, Rapa Nui. This tiny, remote speck of land in the Pacific Ocean is arguably the world's most heavily referenced parable of ecocide.
The narrative, heavily popularized by Jared Diamond in his book Collapse, is deeply ingrained in the public consciousness.
It goes like this, right? Polynesian voyagers discovered this pristine, heavily forested island. The volcanic soil was rich, their crops flourished, and they experienced a massive caloric surplus.
And instead of managing this wealth responsibly, they channeled all their free time into a competitive obsession with monument building.
The moai, the massive, iconic stone heads and torsos, they carved nearly 1,000 of these giants from the volcanic tuff at the Rano quarry and transported them miles across the island to stand on ceremonial platforms.
According to the widely taught ecocide theory, rolling these multi-ton statues required vast amounts of timber. Rapa Nui became so obsessed with status competition that they chopped down every single tree on the island.
Which caused massive soil erosion. And without wood, they couldn't build canoes to fish the deep waters.
Their population, which had supposedly swelled to an unsustainable 15 or even 30,000 people due to the initial abundance, suddenly faced mass starvation, warfare, and total societal collapse.
They supposedly committed ecological suicide. It is an incredibly neat, satisfying story. It warns us about the dangers of overconsumption.
But the sources for our deep dive today feature a massive plot twist. Based on the newest genomic science from 2024, we have the story completely backwards.
Wait, really? Completely backwards?
Yes, a paradigm-shifting study was published in the journal Nature. Researchers managed to analyze the ancient genomes of 15 Rapa Nui individuals whose remains have been taken to Paris museums in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Let's look at how modern geneticists actually read the past, because the mechanism is fascinating. When a human population crashes dramatically, say 30,000 people starve to death over a few generations until only 2,000 or 3,000 are left, the surviving gene pool is radically shrunk.
Right. Over subsequent generations, because there are so few people to reproduce with, you start seeing long stretches of DNA where the genetic material inherited from the mother and the father are completely identical.
It's called runs of homozygosity. It leaves an unmistakable, permanent scar of a genetic bottleneck in the DNA.
Exactly. And if the Jared Diamond ecocide narrative were true, those 15 ancient genomes would show a massive, flashing warning sign of a severe bottleneck occurring before Europeans arrived.
And they didn't.
They found absolutely no such signature.
Yeah.
There was no pre-contact population crash. The Rapa Nui didn't breed themselves into a 30,000-person starvation event.
That's mind-blowing.
In fact, combining the genomic data with advanced satellite mapping of their brilliant rock-mulching agricultural gardens, the evidence shows that the population was stably and sustainably growing, hovering around a perfectly manageable 3,000 people.
And the genomes even showed pre-contact indigenous American ancestry, proving these master navigators had contact with the Americas long before Columbus.
But the absolute devastation of the ecocide myth changes everything. If they didn't eat themselves to death, why did their civilization collapse?
Because by the late 19th century, there were barely 100 Rapa Nui left.
The true demographic catastrophe was entirely external. It was imported. In the 1860s, brutal Peruvian slave raids descended on Rapa Nui, kidnapping a massive percentage of the healthy adult population to work in guano mines.
And following the slave raids, the returning ships brought foreign epidemics, smallpox, and tuberculosis to an isolated population with no acquired immunity.
That is what crashed the Rapa Nui population down to roughly 110 individuals.
So we've been using them as the poster child for ecological suicide when really they were victims of a home invasion.
Yes. We look at the moai and think, look at those arrogant people, destroying their only home for a status symbol, while we sit in traffic jams burning fossil fuels.
It is pure projection. It is so convenient for heavily consumptive modern Western societies to project our own deep anxieties about overconsumption onto ancient indigenous peoples.
Recognizing this projection shifts our understanding of abundance completely. We often assume that giving human beings a massive surplus guarantees they will wildly overshoot their environment's carrying capacity.
But the reality of Rapa Nui suggests that human societies are actually remarkably adept at finding sustainable equilibrium with their resources.
Even while building monumental cultural capital.
But let's explore what happens when we do reach that equilibrium. Think about your own neighborhood. Let's say a magic wand is waved tomorrow, and every single basic survival need is permanently met.
Okay.
Nobody is hungry, nobody is cold, everyone has health care. Does human competition just evaporate? Do we all just sit on the porch and read poetry?
This is where we encounter the third countercurrent in our historical framework. Abundance does not eliminate scarcity. It merely manufactures new forms of it. This is known as the positional paradox.
The concept of positional goods is the key to understanding human behavior in an age of abundance. A positional good is an item or a status marker whose entire value is derived from the fact that your neighbor does not have it.
It is a measure of relative wealth rather than absolute wealth. In the ancient Pacific Northwest, once everyone in the village has enough stored salmon to survive the winter, status can no longer be based on having a full belly.
Right, status migrates.
It becomes about who has the most intricately carved, slightly taller cedar housepost, or who can throw the most lavish potlatch and give away the most copper.
In Guineala, it's about the complexity of the mola. On Rapa Nui, it might have been the size or the specific placement of the moai.
Think about this in modern terms.
It's exactly like the smartphone upgrade cycle, isn't it? When you get a brand new lightning-fast smartphone, it feels incredible. You possess a supercomputer in your pocket.
But that feeling of immense technological abundance lasts exactly until the next morning when your coworker walks in with the Pro Max version.
With a titanium case and an extra camera lens, your phone hasn't degraded overnight. It hasn't lost any absolute utility. But its positional value has completely plummeted because human nature recalibrated the baseline.
You can solve absolute poverty by raising the material floor with a surplus. But you can never solve relative inequality if a society is structured around positional competition.
The survival baseline rises, but the status game never ends. Human nature will relentlessly reinvent want out of thin air.
Which brings us back, finally, to that brightly lit stage with the modern tech billionaires.
Yeah, they aren't promising us rivers thick with salmon or hyper-efficient mud gardens in the middle of a lake. They are explicitly promising artificial intelligence and fusion power.
And they are using the exact vocabulary we've been dissecting: abundance.
So how do we take the lessons of the deep past, from the Tlingit, the Aztecs, the Muisca, and the Rapa Nui, and apply them to the immediate future?
The dominant narrative from the tech sector is that AI, fueled by cheap, clean energy, will create a civilizational surplus unlike anything we have ever experienced. We hear concepts like post-scarcity, universal basic income, fully automated luxury.
And reputation economies, which sound suspiciously like a digital potlatch. A world where physical goods are so cheap and abundant that the only way to gain status is through social clout and competitive giving.
But before we get to the sociology, we have to look at the cold, hard physical limits. We talk about artificial intelligence like it's a magic, ethereal cloud. But AI is a hungry physical beast.
The energy appetite of large language models and global data centers is staggering. According to the sources, global data center electricity demand was roughly 460 terawatt-hours in 2024.
Projections show that number leaping to over 1,000 terawatt-hours by 2030, and potentially pushing 1,300 terawatt-hours by 2035.
To put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of adding the entire energy consumption of a major industrialized nation to the grid every few years, purely to power server farms.
And this introduces a massive economic trap known as the Jevons paradox.
William Stanley Jevons was an economist in the 19th century who studied coal consumption.
Right. He made a counterintuitive observation. As technological improvements increase the efficiency with which a resource is used, the total consumption of that resource actually rises rather than falls.
It's the exact same mechanism as highway expansion. Think about your morning commute. The city council decides traffic is terrible, so they widen the local highway from 2 lanes to 4 lanes to increase efficiency.
And for a month, traffic flows beautifully.
But that newfound efficiency drastically lowers the cost of commuting in terms of time. So people who used to take the train start driving. People buy houses further out in the suburbs because the drive is supposedly easier.
That is induced demand. Within a year, all 4 lanes are completely jammed.
AI is the new highway, and limitless clean energy is just a wider lane. If we make energy infinitely cheap, AI will invent a million new ways to use it.
The total energetic footprint of humanity won't shrink. It will explode.
Managing that explosion is the central thesis of Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson's 2025 book, Abundance. They argue that in the modern developed world, scarcity is rarely a strict physical limitation anymore.
It is a chosen governance-made failure. We possess the technology and the capital to build enough housing, generate enough clean power, and manufacture enough goods.
But layers of regulatory bottlenecks, legacy zoning laws, and political gridlock have engineered artificial scarcity.
They advocate for a liberalism that builds. We have to actively choose to construct the infrastructure of abundance.
So, drawing on everything we've discussed today, the historical blueprints of how human beings handle massive surpluses, What are the actionable frameworks for modern policymakers staring down the barrel of the AI revolution?
We can synthesize the historical record into three vital policy pillars. Pillar number one, distribution is a deliberate choice.
We saw this clearly in the Pacific Northwest.
Right. A massive localized surplus, whether it's millions of salmon or trillions of dollars generated by automated AI labor, does not naturally distribute itself evenly. Left to its own devices, a surplus builds steep hierarchy.
If the AI revolution creates unprecedented global wealth, but we fail to design robust distribution mechanisms like universal basic income or massive public dividends, it will simply build a modern techno-feudalism.
Wealth will hyper-concentrate in the hands of the individuals who own the compute and the models, creating a vastly unequal society with a massive left-behind underclass.
We must design the distribution because extreme inequality is the historical default setting of abundance.
Pillar number two draws directly from the Guna people of Panama, organized to defend the surplus. Public benefit from energy abundance requires active, sustained political defense.
The Guna maintained their cultural capital, their molas, and their gold because they built an autonomous political structure to push back against an extractive state.
In the modern context, the extractive forces aren't colonial police. They are the monopolistic megacorporations attempting to enclose the AI commons.
If local communities or municipalities want to reap the benefits of cheap fusion energy or AI automation, they cannot be passive consumers.
They need autonomous political structures to ensure that the surplus generated in their region isn't entirely siphoned off to a corporate headquarters on the other side of the country.
And pillar number three requires acknowledging the positional paradox. Manage manufactured scarcity. Policymakers must accept that even if we successfully engineer a world where basic needs are universally met, human competition will not end.
It will immediately shift to positional goods.
Think about the real estate market. If everyone in your city is suddenly given $1 million a year in UBI, what happens to the price of the single house that has the absolute best view of the park?
It skyrockets to $1 billion. The abundance didn't eliminate scarcity, it just relocated it to the view.
Competition will pivot to accessing the fastest, unthrottled tier of AI models, or securing human-curated artisanal experiences in a sea of synthetic content.
Therefore, public policy should not naively attempt to engineer a frictionless utopia with zero competition. That goes against the grain of human nature.
Instead, policy should focus ruthlessly on raising the absolute floor, guarantee the baseline survival surplus for every single citizen, and accept that the messy human game of status will simply continue to be played on top of that secure foundation.
Okay, let's pull all these threads together. This has been an astonishing journey through human nature.
We started by defining the baseline of human civilization as an equation written in surplus. From the specialized bead makers of the ancient Levant to the salmon-rich longhouses of the Pacific Northwest.
To the hyper-efficient floating gardens of Tenochtitlan and the meticulous acid-bathed gold of the Muisca. Human beings have proven remarkably brilliant at converting spare time into staggering cultural marvels.
But the shadow is relentless. Surplus breeds steep hierarchy, it finances the logistics of warfare, and it acts as a magnet for violent extraction.
Abundance is the ultimate double-edged sword. It is the fuel for our most profound artistic achievements and our most horrific capacities for coercion, both funded by the exact same caloric slack.
Which leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative thought to ponder. Throughout this entire deep dive, we have focused on physical monuments.
Megalithic stone giants standing guard in the Andes and on the shores of Rapa Nui. Cedarwood genealogies, hammered gold rafts, and intricately sewn layers of cloth.
But if artificial intelligence and limitless clean energy genuinely deliver the next great civilizational surplus, the cultural capital of the future might not take up any physical space whatsoever.
It is a radical shift in the nature of monuments. The cultural capital of an AI-driven abundance might be entirely digital.
We are looking at expansive virtual mythologies, immersive synthetic realities, and vast architectures of code generated in seamless collaboration between human intent and machine execution.
And if the monuments of the future are digital, then the modern kings won't be the ones hoarding grain in physical storehouses or holding the best farmland.
The true power will reside with the entities who own the physical server farms that host our digital lives. When the machines are doing the heavy lifting and bare survival finally stops being the fundamental friction of your day-to-day existence, what will you choose to build with your free time?